we now know that the Iran deal will survive Congress, but roughly half the country is opposed to it, and virtually every Republican presidential candidate says they're going to rip it up when they enter office. So how secure is the deal, really?
Well, first of all, enormous amounts of money. There's been a huge bombardment of distortions and outright, just untruths, I guess is the word I will use, about what this deal does and how it does it. So I'm not surprised that some polls show an imbalance, but the fact is a lot of polls show that the country actually supports it and there's a fairly even divide. I think that's pretty good considering the amount of money that's been spent with myths being promulgated. With respect to the presidential candidates and what they say today, look, if Iran destroys its Arak plutonium reactor core, filling it with cement, and it exists no longer, and Iraq dismantles 2/3 of their centrifuges and is no longer enriching, and it lowers its stockpile to 300 kilograms, and it is only enriching to 3.67%, and it has done everything it said it would do to live up to the agreement. If a new president came in and said, this would be absurd. The country will be 90% supportive by that point in time because they will see that it is in fact working and it has eliminated the threat of a nuclear weapon in the Middle East.
So you think this is largely bluster?
No, I think there are very legitimate questions being asked.
I'm talking specifically about the candidates saying they'd rip it up.
Well, look, I'm not going to characterize what it is or isn't. I'm just giving you my take on what the reality will be when a new president is there. I cannot see a president willfully taking the United Nations, 5 other nations who supported us in this negotiation, and saying, sorry, we're just going to walk away from this and create a more dangerous situation in the Middle East. I just don't see that happening.
One of the more persuasive criticism, I think, of the deal is that sort of in the out years, after Iran has benefited from sanctions relief, our hands are sort of tied here. And by that I mean, we won't be able to further crack down on their regional instability, their funding of terrorism, because they'll turn around and they'll say, well, that's violating the spirit of the deal, and they might back out. So what do you say to that critic?
I say to that critic that this deal is very specifically defined. It is laid out paragraph for paragraph. The expectations are written because we didn't want anything based on trust or based on hope. This agreement is very specific in what it requires people to do. And if Iran, after X number of years, there is a transition from some of the more stringent restrictions that we negotiated for a period of time, but that's to build some element of confidence about what their program is. That's to get the people in place to be able to inspect. That's to be able to know that, in fact, there is an efficient implementation process that you can rely on. And that 15-year period when you suddenly, not suddenly, but when you know that you have the size of the stockpile change or something, you still have the total requirement of access for inspection to any site, anywhere, where we suspect that they may be engaged in some illicit activity. You also have 20 years of televised tracking of production of their bellows and rotors, which are critical elements of their centrifuges, and you have, very significantly, first time ever in any arms control agreement, 25 years of a tracking of their uranium production from the mine all the way to the grave.
But the idea here is that they might not be good faith actors, that they may take the opportunity of the U.S. clamping down on terrorism funding and say, you know what, they're going out.
That's their problem. If they were to do that, it's their problem because we will hold them accountable to this agreement. And if they break it or in any way give us pause to think that they are pursuing a nuclear weapon, we have every option available to us then that we have today.
All right, so you're an architect, and you're probably the most vocal booster of the deal. I'm curious, what is your biggest worry about the implementation of the deal specifically?
Well, I think the one concern one would have is that you have some element within Iran that pushes back or refuses to do something, in which case the Iranian government is going to have to answer for that. So I can see the potential that you may have a hiccup here or there where you've got to confront something like that, but I don't see the government at this point opening itself up to the potential of a snapback of all of the sanctions and the potential, obviously, also of military action if that was the only option available.
Yeah. The administration has hinted or said basically that they want to work with Gulf states and Israel to ramp up their national security and defense mechanisms in light of this. As a practical matter, how does introducing more weapons to the region help stabilize it?
Well, they're defensive weapons. They're weapons that will enable these countries to be able to defend themselves, and that's a very important ingredient of deterrence. Mm-hmm. But we would be doing this in many respects anyway, regardless of the deal, because Iran's activities with respect to Hezbollah, its transfer of weapons to the Iraqi Shia militia, its transfer of weapons to the Houthi, and elsewhere are deeply disturbing. They are contrary to the embargo, mm-hmm. And we should oppose that under any circumstances. Sure. So I think what we will find here is a unique, newly developing security architecture for that region that will see Israel and Arab countries actually in common cause to have a kind of barrier against this kind of Iranian
that would
activity.
Be a unique common cause.
It will indeed be unique.
Because it sounds.
But that's in. I think that's very much in the air right now.
And have the Israelis expressed openness to collaborating with Gulf states that have traditionally not been?
I think it is fair to say that if you look,
Israel?
For instance, at Egypt, I mean, the answer is it's happening now.
Yeah.
I mean, Jordan and Egypt are already cooperating with Israel with respect to the Sinai, mm-hmm. with respect to jihadism in the region, and I would anticipate that that would continue and perhaps even grow.
This is probably an oversimplification, but in some respects it sounds like there's a trade-off being made here. We're risking the possibility of smaller regional conflict to diminish the likelihood of larger cataclysmic conflict.
I don't see it that way at all. What we're trying to do is make it clear to Iran that if it wants to join the community of nations and be a nation in good standing, working towards peace and stability without supporting proxies and surrogates, there is a road to achieve that. Okay. But if, on the other hand, Iran wants to continue with its current procedures, we are going to be united in our efforts to not allow that destabilization and to stand up to those kinds of activities. And I might add,
go ahead.
There's a very important, Sam, I'm sure you're aware of it, I mean, with Daesh, ISIL out there, there's a unifying factor for many of these countries in the region, by the way, including Iran.
Yeah, I want to get to that.
Because Iran is significantly opposed
to
their activity.
Before we get to that, the president has made the case that the same people who voted for the Iraq war are essentially inviting a war with Iran by opposing this deal. You voted for the Iraq war. I'm wondering how that vote has affected your thinking about this deal and this agreement.
Well, let me make it clear. If you read my speech, which I invite you to do, that I gave on the floor when I described the vote, I did not vote to rush to war. I voted to give the president a tool to enable him to exhaust the remedies available to him in order to be able to leverage the behavior we wanted from Saddam Hussein.
Well, let me rephrase it.
But that didn't happen.
Sure.
And I regret that. And I've regretted that vote as a result because I thought it was abused. I thought there was a rush to war, contrary to what had been promised in terms of exhausting the remedies. So it was a bad vote, and that's the way it is. But that's very different from what we're looking at today, because I think that in the case of Iran, everybody is united in not wanting Iran to get a nuclear weapon. The only question is, what is the best means of doing that? We believe that having this agreement with the 10-year requirement, the 15-year requirement, the 20-year requirement, the 25-year requirement, the lifetime requirement, that they have to live by the additional protocol and allow access for inspections, that is far more valuable and important to hold on to than voting no and having nothing. No restrictions, no inspections, no sanctions, and losing our currently hard-won unity of the P5+1 and the rest of the
So there wasn't
world.
anything redemptive about this, that we wanted to pursue diplomacy even further than 2002 when we rushed to
No,
a
on the contrary, I believe deeply, and I've always believed, and that was at the heart of, that's why I say,
Yeah.
go read what I said on the Senate floor.
I will.
I believe you have to exhaust the remedies.
Yeah.
And we did not, in fact, want to give license to go just, you know, let's go do a war of choice.
Yeah.
War should be not a war of choice, it should be a war of necessity, and it should be a last resort. That has always driven me.
Yeah.
And I believe that in this case, we had an obligation to exhaust the possibility of a diplomatic solution with Iran before we start heading down a road towards inevitable conflict.
Now, you told the Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg that Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif said he would, quote, be empowered to work with and talk to you about regional issues once this deal was done. Have you had any discussions?
No, we haven't yet.
Okay.
The deal's not done.
What do you envision? Yeah, that's a good point. I guess the 34th vote is not the final element here. But what do you envision those discussions to be about?
About the region.
Okay.
About
Anything
what's
specific?
happening in Syria, particularly. Well, Syria, particularly. Okay. I mean, the killing that is taking place in Syria is an insult to everybody, to any nation that is seeking decency and rule of law. It is a strategic catastrophe for the region, for all of us. It puts greater pressure on Jordan, greater pressure on Lebanon, greater pressure on Turkey. There are now some 8 million people displaced within the country, 4 million refugees outside. We are the largest donor, I'm proud to say, to the refugee crisis, but I want to stop donating to a refugee crisis and start seeing those people.
You think Iran you think there's enough elements of potential collaboration with the Iranian leadership to get a diplomatic resolution?
We haven't explored that yet,
Okay.
Sam, obviously. But Iran hates ISIL, and so do we. ISIL is a danger. It's such a stunning contradiction in the 21st century. After all we have been through, to see a group out there destroying temples and beheading people who try to protect them, and you know, making rape an instrument of war and empowerment of their people in the most disgraceful way. We have to do something about this, more, frankly, and I think the world, with the migration crisis in Europe, is starting to wake up to the
Well, let's
fact
talk about
that
the
more
migration
has to be
crisis.
done.
I mean, it's becoming an increasingly urgent problem here, the Syrian
Very
refugee
urgent.
crisis. Can we be doing more to help Europe handle this, or help the Gulf states handle this? What can we be doing to make
Well, I
this?
think what it underscores is the need to deal at the source. I think you have to prevent this kind of massive exodus of human beings.
Absent though solving the civil war in Syria, which is not going to happen tomorrow.
No, but we
What
could
can we
do,
do
we
in the
could do a
immediate
lot
future?
more to protect those people. Well, you obviously have to create a structure for those people aren't so desperate.
Yeah.
They have to be provided with temporary housing and capacity to be fed.
Could we take more? I mean, Germany's taking 800,000.
Well, I'm not talking about taking on a permanent basis. So we have huge refugee camps in Jordan, in Lebanon. They're spread more in the population. In Turkey, we have refugee camps, and it may be that we have to set up some sort of a refugee camp structure for the time being in order to deal with it. But I hope this will be more of a call to a lot of countries that there has to be more focus on the
Did you see
underlying
that picture of the 3-year-old Syrian boy this morning by any chance? What were your thoughts?
Oh, I mean, it's such a disturbing and provocative picture in so many ways. I mean, it's, you know, I have a little grandchild that age, and that's what you think about.
Yeah. So we're coming upon the year anniversary of the president declaring war on the Islamic State. There were recent reports that military intelligence reports are being essentially doctored or rosied up to, I don't know, maybe influence policymakers or hide the truth about the state of the Islamic State campaign. Have you seen these?
Military reports and
There are reports that I believe the Pentagon Inspector General is looking into, reports that these intelligence reports about the state of the Islamic State campaign that we're waging is going better than it actually is. Have you seen this?
I have not seen this. No, that's news to me. But I mean, I don't think anybody has gilded the lily in any report to me. We know this is a big challenge. I think certain parts of it are going well in certain places, and there are other parts where it's not. But it's clear that more has to be done in order to destroy.
I mean, how would you categorize our progress a year in?
I think we've made progress in certain places. We had 100,000 people return in Tikrit. Sunni were able to go back to their homes that had been taken over by ISIL. We've seen the Ramadi effort campaign begin to make some progress indeed. The Sunni tribes are joining and beginning to pick up the fight, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. Mosul remains under their control. In the Kurd component of the country, we've seen a significant pushback, a more competent, frankly, pushback against ISIL. I think in the northern part of Syria, there's some progress has been made of late, but there's still too many people who are able to slip through, come in, too many recruits, too much sustainability to something that shouldn't be sustainable at all.
Looking forward a little bit. So you got the Iran deal done, you got Cuba done. What's next on your bucket list in your time in this office?
Well, we got to try to see if we can get an agreement on climate change in Paris. This is a very, very important priority for us. We're working on it very hard. That was why I went to Alaska and we had the meetings with our fellow foreign ministers there. My hope is this began when I went to China 2 years ago and we began to open up participation with China, an historic agreement with China. And hopefully that comes together to produce something in Paris. I mean, that's really critical.
Well, let me ask you about that. I mean, the big debate right now is that your first speech in the Arctic Council, we talked about the prospects of clean energy sources in the Arctic. The first action as U.S. as chair of the Arctic Council was to essentially allow Shell to do exploratory drilling off the coast of Alaska. Isn't there a bit of a mixed message there?
Not really, because these are leases that were granted some time ago prior to President Obama becoming president. So the leases existed. And Shell and other companies are going to be drilling somewhere over the course of these next years because we're not going to suddenly be weaned from oil. And it's a cleaner oil than others. I think in terms of our efforts to begin to move to a decarbonized economy, it's going to take 20, 30, 40 years. So there's going to be some element of that.
It's not like you could just cut it off.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, I'd rather have our supply come from an American-controlled source in that respect than from somewhere else. But I think in the long run, we have to wean ourselves from a carbon-based economy. We absolutely have to. We have to do it much faster than we are right now. I think the president understands that. I understand that. We're advocating as powerfully as we can, and the president, unfortunately, because of the reluctance of some members of Congress to even believe it's happening, has to move by administrative
They take snowballs onto the Senate floor. You know?
Has to move by administrative order, and that makes it very difficult.
We've reached the domestic politics portion of this program, I think. So,
We have?
Oh yes, we have.
We were that.
We're just a few questions. The government employees, whistleblowers, are in jail today for mishandling classified information, sometimes, unintentionally. But we're only hearing Democrats and other people talk about overclassification as an issue now that former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has had her email issues. Is there not, a double standard going on here that we don't care that much?
No, here's the difference, Sam, and I think there is a real difference here, and I think people need to focus in very carefully on it. I have known, first of all, I'm not commenting on the merits of this, generally speaking, because there's an investigation taking place. My responsibility is to get the emails out of here as rapidly as possible so people can make judgments about them. But one of the judgments that can be made to date is that there is no evidence that something was transmitted that was classified at the time. That's what you're talking about. Whistleblowing on that is about classified information. But if information came into somebody's BlackBerry or in somebody's email that wasn't classified and then was later classified in the system, that's a whole different ballgame.
Sure. Now, you've been on both sides of this, legislative branch, executive branch. As a general matter, do you think we overclassify?
Yes.
What should we do about this?
Well, it's very tricky because, there's massive amount of overclassification. People just stamp it on quickly because it's a way to sort of be correct if anybody had a judgment that somehow they'd been wrong about whether it should be classified or not. So the easy thing is classify it and put it away.
Yeah.
But
there's an acronym for that. It's CYA. Probably not good for the cameras. Cover your eyes.
But I have initiated a review within this department, and I wrote personally to the Inspector General, and I invited the Inspector General to review the process so that we have as much accountability and insight on our own system as we can have. And we're prepared, you know, this whole phenomenon of email, obviously, is something that's developed in the last years. And the system needs to catch up to how do you manage it properly? How do you handle so much volume?
Last two quick questions, just between us and these cameras. You're running, right?
That's a very small world, right?
Small world, right?
I know you'll keep a secret.
Yeah, obviously, no one's going to hear this, right? Are you thinking? Would you be interested in running for president again?
I'm not running.
Why not?
It's just not on the table right now. I like the job I'm doing. I have great challenges in this job. I have an agenda that I want to pursue over the course of the next months, and I like Paris, and you know, I've been working on the climate change issue for years, since I was in the Senate. It's
funner to do that than run for president.
Not necessarily, but it's getting something done,
okay.
And I think that that's what's important right now.
All right, and then I'm going to ask you a question that's a lot more controversial than a presidential run. Tom Brady, he's a free man, can play in the first football game. Is this justice served or justice denied?
You want me to comment on that?
I want you to comment on this.
I can't believe that. You a good Red Sox fan?
I'm a Red Sox, but I'm a Giants fan. I'm in that Connecticut divide. I'm in the Connecticut divide.
That shows an inexplicable ambivalence.
I know.
Really
I've heard this before from other members of our office. Are you happy that the suspension's been lifted?
I'm delighted. I'm thrilled, and I'm looking forward to seeing Tom Brady and the Patriots against Pittsburgh on the 10th.
All right. You got a Dunkin' Donuts in this building now, which is great for a New Englander like yourself.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Long overdue.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thanks,
Secretary. I
Sam.
appreciate it.
Good to see you.